So as far as the projects that I'm currently working on, the one I'm most excited about is the Mexican-American War Dead project. That this has been in the works for 5 or 6 years now. The Mexican-American War was, of course, took place in Mexico. It was between the United States and the nation of Mexico. And we had American troops that went down and fought in Mexico against Mexican forces. And we had regular army troops, and then we also had volunteers. And of course, some of those soldiers died on the battlefield. And some of them were buried on the battlefield. And so we heard in, I want to say 2014, that some of those had been excavated and were in a museum repository in Mexico City. And so we initiated, and we is me and Dr. Hugh Berryman, who's a forensic anthropologist who's here among the faculty at MTSU, and then Dr. Derek Frisbee, who's a historian here at MTSU. We initiated a long and involved process of getting those remains repatriated to the United States. And that finally happened, and we've been able to do our bioarchaeological research on those remains in terms of trying to identify them, trying to know more about what happened to them, both in their life up to the point that they died in battle, and then of course battle-related injuries, etc. And then of course our historian is doing the historical background on it. The U.S. military is doing DNA studies for us to help us figure out, we may actually be able to put names to some of these people. And it has been such a rewarding experience because, you know, we've worked with the U.S. military very closely. With the U.S. military, we have worked closely with forensic anthropologists from across the nation. We've had our MTSU forensic anthropologist and bioarchaeologist. The best part is that we've had students with us, that we've had probably half a dozen students that all of this research took place at the Armed Forces Medical Examiner's Office in Dover, Delaware. So the place that you see on the news where the U.S. Service members that fall in action all come through Dover, Delaware. We actually worked in those labs, and we were able to take students with us into those laboratories to meet the forensic anthropologists and pathologists there, and to get a real hands-on experience, what it's like to do forensic anthropology research and bioarchaeology research. So it's just been fantastic.
So what do I do for my research? Well, I can answer that with one word, and that word is SALT. So I'm currently doing an archaeological field school at the Castellian Springs mound site, and it's called Castellian Springs because there are a series of salty mineral springs at the site. And even though the site had been excavated all the way back into the 1800s, no one had ever bothered to look at the salt mineral springs at the site. So that is what our field school at MTSU is currently doing. We are seeing how the people at Castellian Springs use the mineral springs at the site.
You know, my research right now is kind of funny because one of the things I was doing before the pandemic was thinking about how anthropology can speak to the most mundane parts of everyday life. And I was writing a paper on just going to the grocery store and engaging with people at the grocery store, or not engaging with people at the grocery store. And now it's being rewritten as sort of we used to do this and we can't do this anymore. And so that's a small project that kind of shows you that anthropologists can go anywhere in any direction. The other thing I'm writing right now is a paper on national parks and their engagement with local communities, and the way that history is constructed in a national park versus history is constructed by families who own property around national parks. And so it's about land and family and community and history, and hopefully that will come into something.
Projects. I have a lot of research projects going on right now because I have a hard time finishing old research projects. I am currently writing a couple of articles based on research I did with a team on refugee students at a high school in Middle Tennessee. And so we were looking at these youth ideas about higher education. I'm also finishing up an article on girls, and it's actually about girls in fantasy literature, like young adult fantasy literature, and it kind of looks at literature as an aspect of culture. And what I want to argue is that actually for girls, fantasy literature, sci-fi literature, dystopian literature is a very big part of their culture globally. I'm working with a couple other students. I'm working with one undergrad student on a paper on girls and the ideas of desire and their future lives. And I'm the mentor of another MTSU undergrad who is doing her own research on the Karen community in Smyrna. And they are relatively recent refugee group from the highlands of Myanmar.